got a few minutes, so I'm just going to try to explain somewhat what I want to talk about. Okay, how many here have built guitars? How many have problems fretting? Okay, number one, let me ask you, what's your most difficult part of fretting? Leveling? Okay. First thing that I do, when I first started building, I used to fret the fretboard and put it on the neck. Don't do it. Don't do it. About 5 years ago, I have engineering and tool making background, and I knew there had to be a more reliable way. And please interrupt me anytime if you can add something to this. Here's what I learned about fretting. Fretboard. If your fretboard is not true, your fretting is not going to work very well. So I'm going to say it's just like finishing. It is all about preparing that fretboard. You want your fretboard to be as true as it can be. So I'm going to go on the other side of the table. I have a list of tools here that I use. Now, I'm going to call fretting, we have pocket fretting, which would be like if you have a bound board, or if you just cut a slot that does not go entirely through the board. Regular, good old-fashioned fret, that's the open slot fretting. Compression fretting. Now, what I've learned about a neck is you need to learn how your neck is moving, because not all necks move the same way. And in order to get the perfect action for that guitar, you need to learn how to read your neck. So my basic tools are I have a straight edge. I have sandpaper to this straight edge. This is just a piece of machined aluminum. Not everybody has a milling machine, but you want something that's dead flat. I've learned that a good level is often pretty true. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure that your fretboard is dead level. I kind of treat my fretboard as two fretboards. You have the body joint, and in this case is 14th fret, could be the 12th fret, could be the 13th fret. Doesn't matter, irrelevant. From the body joint to the nut, that's fretboard 1. Fretboard 2 is your extension. Now, do I want a perfectly flat fretboard all the way down? On an acoustic guitar, I actually do not. I do want to have just an ever so slight drop off. The guitar is going to move up and down through humidity changes. So if you're dead flat today and you go outside and it's 80% humidity, I can guarantee you, you will have fret buzz. So you want to treat this is fretboard 1, this is fretboard 2. Number 2, the fret slots. Just going to make a little drawing here. Is there anybody here that does not know what I mean when I say compression fret?
Define it anyway.
Okay. Compression fretting is when, let's say these slots are 23 thousandths. When you measure your fret tang, the fret tangs are going to be like 0.0185, which is 18.5 thousandths, all the way up to 24.5. Sometimes you can find 27, 28 thousandths tang. And as he can tell you, when you're dealing with old guitars that have neck reinforcements, you need that in order to control the backbone. So, even though this is an acoustic guitar and it has a truss rod, I'm going to set this up so that I can read how my neck is going to start to backbow with string tension. Now, obviously, there's no strings on here. So how do I do that? You notice here I have a little note that says 1013. Who here likes rice pudding? All right, go get 2 containers of rice pudding. Eat them up. Clean those containers. Get some shot, fishing sinkers, sand. Make them weigh somewhere between 5 and 6 pounds each. Then you can put the weight on the neck, or right here on the shoulders, support your neck. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but right now, that's dead flat. And if I apply just a little bit of weight on here, I can see a little bit of gap happening in my fretboard. So I like to start with the fretboard flat. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put 3 frets in because I want to be able to read what my fret plane is doing. So I generally put number 1 down here about 5 or 6 and 10. The reason that I do that, and it doesn't really matter particularly, but you want to have 3 points up the neck so you can start to read how the neck is reacting to your fretting. Now, because the neck, as you can see, has a heel, and this is the thickest part of the neck. This is the thinnest part of the neck. This is also the furthest part away from your support. So your neck does not necessarily bend evenly. You might have from here to here maybe a thousandths rise. From here to here, you might have 10. So the way that I want to set up my fretting, I like to see somewhere from about the 5th to 7th fret, I want to see that to start to fall away. So between 7 and 14, you can pretty much pound them in. Now, the other thing that you want to pay attention to is your fret slots are square. Okay, they're machined, cut by a saw, might be cut by an end mill. Your fret is not square. When you look at a fret, unless it's a bar fret, you have a radius right there. And sometimes, depending upon the width of the tang and the size of your fret slot, as you're setting the fret, that little bit of a radius is going to hold you off. So you want to take a small file and just gently break the corners of the fret slot. When you look at the fret, it has a tang on it. So while your fret tang itself, I said a tang, I apologize, I meant a barb. So the fret tang could be, as I said, 18.5 thousandths to whatever. That little barb, when you measure it, is actually probably, about 7 thousandths heavy on each side. So you're looking at, add 7 thousandths to whatever, that fret barb is going to have to seat into the end grain of your wood. Now most of it's rosewood or ebony. I really prefer ebony myself. And I will use water, and I like to use Titebond. And the reason why I do that, glue is a lubricant until it dries. And as you're setting that in, that allows that barb to bite. The water helps the wood to swell so that the barb grabs and holds you in. Yes, sir?
Titebond 2?
No. There's no reason to use Titebond 2 in a guitar. Original. You can also use Elmer's white glue. Almost any, I don't like fish glue for fretting because if there's any residue, it gets a little sticky. Hot high glue is kind of just a waste of time. So Titebond, Elmer's, that's all you need.
Are you mixing that Titebond with water, John?
Generally what I do is I take a spray bottle and I'll spray the fretboard, and I just generally do maybe 2 or 3 frets at a time. Then I just squeeze a little bit of glue into the slot, wipe it off with my finger. I have a damp paper towel, wipe that off, and then I set a fret.
So you're using the water first?
Yeah, I want to get the water into the end grain to help soften the wood so that it also starts to expand it so that when I get my fret in, it's going to help hold the barb. Now, how do you read this? Feeler gauges are good. I mean, you and I can probably eyeball 5 thousandths because we've done too damn many. So get your 3 points so that you got a point to measure. Have your static weight so that you can measure the actual flex of your neck. If you really take your time, you can get a very low action that will not buzz because it's all about the geometry. Now, how do you prepare your frets? I just go down the fingerboard, cut myself a variety of fret widths, and that way I know 1 to 20. You can cut one at a time, doesn't really matter. When you nip a fret, with your fret nippers, you're going to have what I call a finished side and an extruded side, because when you cut it, your fret nipper, let's see, where did I put that little marker? There it is. I have a dikes that I just ground on the belt sander. So when you get a set of dikes, you want, when you first get it, you have this effect. Can you see that? Okay, so if you tried cutting a fret with that, you're going to extrude both sides. The metal is always going to take shape of whatever's cutting it. So you grind this off, so you have this. Okay, so that's going to be your finished side. That gives you a much nicer, a more squared cut. Here, pass that around and you'll see one side's nice and straight, one side has a point on it, and be careful, they will cut you. Were you in the fretting class when I was bleeding like a pig?
Yeah.
That was funny, wasn't it?
Good action.
Oh, that was. We weren't bored. So you're going to see how that will play. Okay? Any questions?
So you're adding the weight to the shoulders
Mm-hmm.
in your containers, and you're supporting the headstock?
Yes. I generally use a roll of paper towels or a gun sight thing, and then I just put the weight on here.
So once you read how much it's going to flex, how do you use that information?
Well, good. Why don't you come up here and I'll show you.
Okay.
And then what was your question?
Same question.
Okay. So now and your question. 10 to 13. Okay. That's the weight. Right. 2 bags of salt will work. Anything so that you can actually get to the front here. Okay, Bill's going to take a picture of this, but get right here. And you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. See that straight edge on here?
Yes.
Okay, now kind of squat down real low. See the little bit of light that's on there just from the weight of the guitar?
Yeah.
Now if I put...
Oh, look at that.
See that?
Yeah.
All right?
Yes.
Make sense to you now?
Yeah.
Anybody want to see this? Come on up and I'll show it to you.
That's the way you support the headstock,
Yeah, I usually use a roll of paper towels or a gun sight thing.
but it's under the end of the headstock.
Right. Oh, you can put it under here if you want to. It doesn't matter. So when you put this on here, just the guitar weight alone has just a little bit. But when you put weight on there, see that opening up?
Yes.
Okay?
So you're looking for a certain amount of that when you put the weight on?
Well, what you're looking for is how is that bending? Okay? Because if I come down here, I put the weight on here, and I come down here, that's flat. So most of the flex is going to be up here. Let's see. There. See it?
So that's like 10 pounds each shoulder?
No, total.
7.5. Okay,
Yeah,
5
total.
on each. Okay.
Yeah. So you can see, pardon me, so you can see how the flex of that neck has happened to work. Not all necks will flex the same way. So that's the part that you want to put in your little noggin as you do this. Now, once I know that my neck is true, I'll put those 3 frets in, put my weight. Now I can start measuring, as I'm putting the frets in, what I'm getting. Now, yes, you can control that back bow with your truss rod. No doubt about it. Tell me if you agree with this. If you can set up a fretboard where your frets are actually adding a little bit of tension into the neck, it helps to kill some of the dampening effect of the neck.
Yes, they're well seated.
Right. So the trick to this is when you seat this, you have to remember the barbs are not going to seat like that. They're going to need a day or two to actually set in. So when you're looking for controlling that back bow, you come up here to about the 7th fret, and you just want to start reading, as you'll put in a fret, how that is going to affect that flex. So I am going to be able to put a couple of frets in here just to help to show you how that works. Now, this is a pocket fret neck. Does anybody not know what a pocket fret is? Come on up, let me show you. Okay, now there's 2 ways to cut your barb. There is this tool, and LMI has this tool. That's the best tool there is. And the reason why I like this, you can adjust this file so that when I'm ready to dress my fret end, I can take any residue of the fret tang out of the equation. I'm sure you and I have looked at look at my guitar, and you can see they trimmed the fret barbs, and the fret barbs are holding the ends of the fret up, and they're wondering why the E string hangs underneath the fret. That's why. This is a pocket fret. Can you see how the fret slot does not protrude?
So it's like you put binding on?
Exactly. All right?
Okay.
Who's got my fret wire? All right. Throw that around, then I'm going to put a couple of frets in just to show you how to control that back bow. Now this is kind of,
Oh, I was looking at your LMI thing. I haven't seen that.
oh yeah, this is, and I'll explain how this works in a couple of seconds here. Okay, this is a pocket fret. See how the slot ends? It doesn't go all the way out?
okay.
Okay. The old Martins, they were slotted all the way through, and then you got to drop fill them. So is it better? I like the looks of it because it saves a lot of time, but you and I probably refretted 1,000 guitars, and you know, you take a look at people's fret work, you can tell right away if they're really mastering fretting. Okay, yes sir.
Things back up fret slot width and angle. How are you matching those up?
Okay, generally on most guitars, and let's take it from a new guitar perspective. If you buy a fretboard, the majority of them are going to have a 23 thousandths fret slot. I did not bring a dial caliper or mic, I should have. But when you looked at the frets, you saw how the barbs are on there. So your fret tang is what it is. The barbs are going to add a little extra, and they will kind of push back a little bit. You can pretty much do from here down 18, 19 and a half thousandths. And I want to cover this point. If I'm going to put frets on the fingerboard extension, I do use the Taylor fret buck. If you don't have a fret buck, you can squeeze them in with a clamp. All right? You don't want to be hammering on top of a guitar without something underneath it to absorb. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim a fret. So if you want to come up here and see what I'm talking about, please do. You want to come up here with your little camera. Now this little piece here, in fact, I'll send one around, trimmed and finished. All right? I lay my fret so I know about where I got to trim to, and I just look at the barbs. So I'm going to come in to a barb here if you want to take a picture of this. Okay, can you see the barbs nice? Okay. I'm going to trim the fret tang off so that the crown of the fret hangs over what I'm going to call, you could call it binding, but the uncut part of the fretboard. Do you have a Band-Aid just in case? Oh man, I did bleed good, didn't I? Now, if you look at this, see the tool? Your fret tang fits in here, and then you cut it off. And you can see there's a little bit of residue of the fret tang. Yes, you see that?
Yeah.
All right. Now I can put this in here, and I can see where the end of my fret tang ends in relationship to the slot over here, and that's basically 2 barbs in. See that?
Yep.
So now, oh, I moved. You tell me when to.
Okay.
You tell me when I can move.
When to freeze.
Yeah, you make me sit there for 2 hours just for spite, wouldn't you? Okay. So now I've nipped.
John, I didn't understand the comment 2 barbs in. When you're speaking of barbs, are you talking about that uncut?
No, in here there's barbs on here.
Okay.
So I'm using that as a reference to where I need to trim off.
And when you say 2 barbs in, you mean in from the end of the slot?
Just on this particular fret, when I laid it on there, in order to cut to the end of the slot, I needed to cut off 2 barbs in on this side. So it was just a reference of measurement using the barbs as a way of doing that.
So you want it to be pretty much right to the end of the slot?
I like to leave about a 1/16 of an inch. I don't want them to be right against their.
Question, how much clearance?
Yeah, 1/16 of an inch, and I want the clearance to be on the bass side, not the treble side.
How much radius
Probably about 14 inches. The fretboard is 16, so I overbend the fret wire a little bit. Anybody not see those little crank things for bending fret wire? What do you do, about 2 inches?
I just, so that when you put the fret on top of the fingerboard, there's a little gap in the center.
Yeah.
I just want to see a little gap.
Right.
in the fret.
Yeah, so I generally do 2 inches lower than what I'm working with, because you're going to beat them in anyway. Now, you can see how that slot, see I have about a 1/16 of an inch there? Okay?
Yeah.
Now, I did,
1/16 of
Can
an
you
inch
comment as to
further in.
why on the bass side versus the treble?
sure, you're playing right-handed, you're on the treble. If you pull a string off on the treble side, you want that barb, or you want the crown of the fret to be as tight against the fingerboard. You don't pull off on the bass side. Now, I'm going to just prep this for one little gadget here, and then we're going to pass that around so you get to see what it looks like using the nipper and what you look like using this. So once I have that sized, I can take the trip. Here, let me get this really good. There. This butts against there. See that? I'm against my, here,
Oh, yeah.
like that? How's that?
The other way. The other way. So, yeah, there we go. Hang on 1 second. 1 second. Hang in there. Hang in there.
Very important part of it.
Yes, okay?
Hang in there. Nope, you're not okay. Hang in there 1 second. There we go.
Okay, now, I have this file is set up. When I run this on here, you can hear it. Hear it stop and cut. Now when you look at this fret wire, the barb's gone. See that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Let me see.
pass that around so people can see it. Give it to Pat DeBurrow first, because he'll grade me. He'll give me either a C plus or a D.
So John,
Yes, sir.
is it like one or the other, or do you use the nipper and then the LMI tool?
I'm going to use the nipper and the LMI. You can do it just with the file. I just learned that by using this, I can size my tang. That removes most of the fret, and then I can just finish it off with the file. Okay? Does that all make sense? Yeah, this is fantastic. So now, I'm going to set 10, 6, and 1. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's number 6. So I'm going to take 6 out. I hate tape.
Couldn't live without it.
Oh, yeah, but it can be such a pain in the butt. Okay, so now I'm going to go through this whole setting this fret process again. I'm just going to take a little bit of a nip. And you can see I have, that's my extruded end. So I'm going to want that to be off of this tang, and I want it to protrude, because I'm going to file this off. All right? And don't drive yourself nuts work to spec. Don't be afraid to give you an 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch trim. Okay? It's easier to make shorter than it is to make longer. And there's nothing more frustrating than have a fret job and realize you got 3 frets that are too short. All right? So now, here's number 6. I can line that up to the end of my slot. And again, I'm looking at 2.5 to 3 barbs in. You see that?
Yeah.
Make sense to everybody? If anybody wants to come up and look at this, please do so. So now I'm going to set this guy up. And I don't try to take it all at one cut. Make a couple of nibbles with this, because as he well knows, you can actually twist the crown. And then that kind of ruins your fret. So now you can see that's going to fit in there. I got to take a hair off. It's just a little bit
Long.
too close. Okay, so I can just nibble off. And you can see that barb sitting there. I'm just going to take that barb off. Now when I set this on here, there's my 1/16 of an inch.
Yeah.
Okay?
Take a look at how much you're leaving here.
Okay. All right. The important part is how close you trim your tang. If you work too close and you set your fret, and your fret walks a little bit, as you drop the fret, you're taking the radius out, which actually grows the tang a little bit across there. Next thing you know, you blow out the side of your fretboard or knock the binding off. That is an AFM, and I'll let you figure what that F means.
The other consideration, John, too, is an owner drying out the guitar.
Oh, yeah.
The barbs, the tang is too close to the fingerboard
That's a really good point.
Yep.
that would dries out, it's gonna stick out or crack.
And your point is perfect. You can tell when your guitar starts drying out, you can feel the fret ends coming over the board. So that should be a warning to you as a guitar owner. So now you can listen and you're going to hear. Okay? The other nice thing about this little gadget, it holds the bottom part of the crown flat so you aren't putting a radius or an angle underneath your fret crown. Do you have one of these, Pat?
No, probably the next purchase when the one I have wears out.
And stainless steel and Evo fret wire will work with this. Stainless steel, not so much. So stainless steel, I generally have a little wooden jig and I go over to my belt sander and just gently touch it off. And that I got to thank 25 years of tool making. Now, that fret is ready to pop in. Now, since I left home and the only glue I could find at Walmart was Gorilla Glue, and I'm going to tell you this. Gorilla Glue and epoxy have no business in a guitar. Okay? Do you agree?
Yes.
Not a fretboard.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, why would that?
You don't use Gorilla Glue, do you?
No, I use epoxy on some cracks.
Well, okay, yeah. But you're talking small areas. We aren't talking about a bridge plate.
No,
We aren't talking about, I've had necks epoxied in.
Yeah.
I've had bridge plates epoxied in. And you notice I'm just giving that a couple of seconds for the water. And now that's when I put my glue in.
Gorilla Glue expands, doesn't it?
Yeah, I hate Gorilla Glue.
Yeah.
How do you really feel? Well, I like peanut butter, salted caramel ice cream.
Babies.
Oh, baby. Oh, yeah, we love babies. And unfortunately, I also forgot my eyeballs because I'm blind as a bat. So you
need some
can.
more light here.
Oh, that's okay. I've done this so often I can do it by feel. So you see how I just pressed that in with my finger?
Right.
Now, can you see how the fret tangs or the barbs are now holding that right out of the slot?
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Now, there are some people who prefer to press them in. I learned old school. I like hammering, okay? Takes out a lot of aggression. I will put my hand right underneath the fret wire that I'm working. One tap. And I'm not hitting hard. If you're deforming your frets, you're hitting too hard. This is just. Can you hear it? Hear it seating? That was just for fun. There. Now you see how that fret wire's in?
Beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
And you've already filed the shoulders off the fret slot.
No, here I'm not going to do that because I know I got enough slop. Okay. And I forgot to do that. So there.
To file the corners of the fret slot off on a bound board, what do you use?
I use a pillar file. Is there anybody here that does not know what a pillar file is? These are two examples of pillar files. The nice thing about a pillar file, they have a safe edge. When I was a tool maker, I used a lot of these. I used these for breaking corners. So there. Now you can see what a pillar file is.
Yeah.
All right. Now that I have that nipped, and I forgot to bring my nippers. So yeah, there is a chance of blood today. Who said Luthier's is not a...
Use your teeth.
Plastic does not cut steel. Okay, so now I'm going to come down here to 10, 12. So that was 6. What's that?
Where do you order? I mean, I've looked around online and it's really hard to find a pillar file may be the key name.
Pillar. I have seen them on Amazon.
I got mine on Amazon.
Yeah. Nicholson is the brand of file that I use.
Okay, because Safe Edge doesn't get you much, but
Yeah. Well, if
Pillar is,
in fact, right here, I made a safe edge file on a belt sander
Oh, just by grinding.
just by grinding it off. Okay. Do you use pillar files, Pat?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
And I have some that I've rounded and some are flat.
Yeah. What I like about pillar files, they also make a reasonable facsimile for a straight edge. They are reasonably straight.
John, that other tool you're using, that comes from LMI?
Yes.
I'm surprised you don't make them.
There's some things that just take too much time to make and there's not enough money in it. That's probably made by some little 13-year-old kid in Indonesia.
And what did they go for approximately?
To be honest with you, I bought it 2 years ago at the auction.
Oh, okay.
LMI had them here and they had it at the auction. So I'm not exactly sure. Somebody here with a smartphone, I can see people are looking already, so they'll have a price for you in no time.
We're under the cone of silence there,
Just
though.
a fret,
Unless you're,
just a fret, what would you call that? Fret tang trimmer, fret tang,
Thing true.
yeah, something like that. Fret trimmer,
Hang cutter?
tang cutter,
The LMI file?
this thing, yeah.
Yeah. Under, on the LMI side, it's under budget.
There you go. Thank you very much.
Don't remember what it paid for, but it was worth everything.
Oh my, and the only thing that I did differently is if you see I put screw holes in mine, because I put that right on my workbench and screw it flat. Okay. I don't think they'd appreciate me if I screwed this to something. Okay, let's see, 5, 7, 9, 10. Here's where I want to go. So you can see I got a nice long tang. And don't try to do it all with this guy. You're better off sneaking up on it. And I generally start from the long fret short. That way, if I screw one up, I might be able to slide it up and use it a little bit further. 5, 7, 9, 10. There we go. That'll work.
Little glue.
Yeah. Like I said, I forgot the glue, and we were looking all over. Oh, Gorilla Glue. It's a cute commercial. Okay. And learning how, unfortunately last year I half cut my thumb off, so I'm a little numb here, so be careful on the table saw. So I do have a saw stop. And if I need to, if I need to adjust the fret, I can just gently tap that over like that. My first set is going to be on the treble side because I'm going to walk it from the treble side to the bass side. Same thing?
Bass, treble,
Yeah.
particular reason.
But you'll actually hear this as it seats. The other nice thing with having glue in here, you actually see the tight bond oozing out where the barbs are. And keep one of my favorite tools is a fingernail brush. And then I use that to scrub it off. I used to use a toothbrush, but I found the fingernail brush because I didn't have a toothbrush, and I found, hey, that works pretty damn good. Oh,
CA glue?
I don't use CA glue. I will use it sometimes on through slots if the end doesn't want to stick. Usually when you refret a number of times, the slot gets chewed up because you never know where the barb was from the previous fretting. There I will wick a little bit of super glue to glue the fret ends down if I have to. I prefer not to, but a little bit of super glue is not going to hurt you. Okay? Now, who has my number 1 fret?
That's me, John.
Did I do a good job?
Yeah, you did a really good job. What did you use for this?
Okay, I used the fret tang nipper on the one side and this on the other.
Okay, that's nice.
I really like this tool. You want to play with it?
No, I think Matt's gonna buy one.
Okay, so now I have what they would say in engineering terms datum points. So I now have points where I can actually start manipulating to read what the fretboard's doing. Now, for those of you that came up here and saw how that neck moved in the raw, by applying these frets, Now what's going to happen as I put weight on, the walls of the fret slot are going to be pushing against the barbs in the tang, and that's going to remove some of that forward spring. Anybody here not know what compression fretting is on the old Martins? Okay? That is where the neck was controlled by the different fret tangs up the neck. As you know, I don't have to tell you, it's amazing how much just a couple thousandths in a fret tang can pop a neck back and can actually kind of overset it. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've learned whenever I do compression frets, I got my target. Since I want to have about 6th to 7th back bow when I'm done, on a compression fret, I'm looking closer to 9 or 10 because I'll actually set the guitar up on my bench with the weight and leave it sit for a day or two. That gives the barbs a chance to seat. Then I get a much more reliable read of what the neck has done under the compression fret. Because when you compression fret, you don't have a truss rod. So you have to be able to build that flex into the fretboard to control the neck. And again, it's up from the 7th to the 1. That's where most of the neck is going to move. And your first time you do a compression fret, you can figure you're going to do it 3 times. I think I did my first one 4 times. That's when, I didn't know you back then, I don't think. I harassed Kovacic. Okay. So now, fret has been prepped, tangs have been trimmed, we're ready to pop it in there. But now we can actually start to see what's going to happen. The mystique about fretting is not so much what fret you use and how you use it. Again, I can't stress this enough. Please prepare your fretboard. Because assuming that you buy a kit and that the fretboard is perfect, it's not. And it's amazing what a couple of thousands can do to the appearance of the fret job. There's nothing worse when you and I will sight down a neck and you can see frets that are going all over the place because they trued the crown of the fret. But since the fretboard wasn't trued, you might have a fret. Are you using the 40 by 80s or the 37 by 80s?
Well, it depends on the manufacturer at the time, but more or less 40 by 80.
Okay. Does anybody know what we're talking about?
I do not.
Okay. When you buy a fret, the width of the fret is the 80. The height of the fret is the 37 or the 40. Those have been pretty much the standard. So you have to be careful. Sometimes you buy fret wire from different manufacturers, you're getting different fret wire. I use Jescar. Okay. Jescar, you can buy fret wire from them by the pound. And they do have compression fret wire. So, and bar fret wire I get from TJ Thompson. And I'll explain I'll explain the rotten, ugly bar frets in a short while. I think they named them bar frets because that's where you want to go when you're putting them in. Okay, now, I have 3 frets. All right? I'm not going to worry about down here. Who came up here and looked at this when I had a raw neck? Come on up here. Those 3 frets have actually stiffened that neck considerably.
You get less movement now.
There's less movement now. Okay?
Oh, wow.
Okay?
That's amazing.
Yep.
Just those 3.
Yep.
Yeah. It was flexing like crazy before.
Yeah. So now that you have 3 points, now you know how to put the frets in to make your adjustment. Now, two-way, everybody here use two-way truss rods? Okay. Two-way truss rods are actually somewhat new. Remember the old one-ways. When did they change them? In 2008? Martin.
Yeah, 2007.
Yeah. Up to that point, Martin had a one-way truss rod, which meant it only worked back bow. And what I used to do when I would set up my guitar, I'd actually force the guitar forward a little bit so that I had to rely on the truss rod to get it back. So if I ever needed forward adjustment, I just had to back off the truss rod a little bit. Anybody here use non-adjustable neck reinforcements like carbon fiber? Okay. You do?
Whole engine and stuff that way.
Okay. Yeah, so you understand how you got to kind of bounce your neck back a little bit. And it's not an exact science, but that's where I found applying the weight will help you get a little bit of a handle as to how that neck is working. All right? So I'm going to put a couple more frets in here just to show you how much stiffer this neck will actually get. So I'm going to just put 2 more in here. Let's see, I got 1. I'm going to put in 2. I'll put in 2 5.
I just had a comment about the truss rod, that there's a fellow named DeTemple that makes Telecasters,
Okay.
and everybody said his Telecasters sound fantastic. You know,
Anyway, he's really well regarded. He said that he likes to make his necks with the truss rod tightened to tighten the neck. He said that he gets better tone out of it, so you don't have a loose truss rod right from the start.
Oh yeah, you don't want a loose truss rod.
Yeah.
Even if you don't need to adjust the truss rod for the neck, you do want to tighten it up so that the, yeah. Now, when I use almost all Martin truss rods when I build. I really like their reliability. When StuMac came out with, what did they call it, the hot rod?
Yeah.
I had 3 of them fail, and I'll never use them again.
So do you like the single action or the double action, John, right
I hate to say this, I like the double action because I'm not removing as much wood of the neck. It takes a smaller amount out of the neck. And, you know, I've been doing this for 20 years. I think I can only ever saw 1 guitar that needed a forward tweak. I mean, how many have you seen?
now? Nothing.
Not many. It's rare. It's rare. But again, I think that does come in, that comes in handy because you do, okay, when we talk about truss rods, there's 2 types of truss rods. I'm going to call them the flex and the compressive. The 2-way truss rod is actually a flex because you have a static length. The bottom, as you tighten the barrel nut, will expand or contract, thus forward or reversing the bow. That kind of a truss rod really doesn't influence the neck stiffness per se because it's bending the truss rod. The compressive neck, or the compressive truss rod that was used mostly by Gibson, that is a compressive, which is just a through bolt that it tightens it, and they have that truss rod in there at a slight angle so when it tightens it, it pops a belly into it. That will put the neck under a little bit of compression because that's not relying on something bending it, it's relying on something compressing it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll pay you later for all of your agreement.
Can I ask a question, John?
Certainly may.
Are you going to do something to these subsequent frets based upon the data you collected from seeing what happened after the first 3?
If I was in my home shop, I would.
What would you do?
Well, I would take a look at how it's bending. If I'm not getting enough bend, I'd use a heavier tanged fret wire. And if I'm getting too much, you know, if it's not moving enough, I'd go with the lighter tang.
Now, does that mean from this car, somebody you could order fret wire with different tank width?
That is exactly true. Yes.
So you had a quiver of different tank widths you could go to.
I wouldn't call it a quiver. I'd just call it a massive coil of grap. Yeah, but yeah, I have a diagonal box like shelves that's laid in there from 018-9 up to 027. And that way I can kind of keep track of where it is.
And you have the same width and height on the actual
Yes.
fret.
Yes. And I think did they come out with the 4080 compression wire yet? Because it's 3780.
I don't think so.
Yeah. And the reason that the 3780 is popular, that was the basic Martin T fret that was used from way back when.
So John, what you're saying is you're looking for, so when you put the weight on, you've got a bit of a bow happening
Right.
forward. You're trying to straighten that bow out with the fret tangs? Is that what you're
What I'm actually trying to do is give it just a touch of a back bow. And I'm hoping with the 2 frets that I put in now, you'll come up now and see that when I put weight on, it either stays flat, and when I release the weight, there should be just a slight drop off. Okay? The reason why you want the drop off, and this is, like I said, it's not an exact science. The shape of the wood, the cross-reference, or the cross-sectional shape, you can influence the stiffness of any structure by its shape. We're going to take you to, any engineers in here? Okay. They understand that stiffness of the material is in relation cubed to the height. Okay? So if I have a 1x1 piece of wood, and I put X amount of weight on there, that deflection is going to be Y. I can take that same piece of wood, which is 1 square inch, rip it down the middle, and now it's 1/2 by 2. And now instead of having 1 times 1 times 1 is a relationship of 1, 2 times 4 times 8. So now that becomes 8 times stiffer than the square. So the neck shape can influence the stiffness and the way that the neck will flex.
I'm not an engineer.
Oh, okay.
I understood that maybe there's a difference between stiffness and deflection.
Yeah.
One was the square of the height and the other was the cube.
I don't have my book anymore, and since I haven't done engineering for quite some time, is he correct? Yeah. I know the stiffness and
Technically
the,
speaking, stiffness is a property of the material.
right?
But the shape factor goes with the cube of the height.
There you go. So so we would, there we go. So we would say that the deflection is the cube to the height at that point. Not necessarily, you're going to have a yield.
The wood has the stiffness that it has, the geometry factor
Right.
goes with the cube of the height.
We're manipulating the yield and the plastic length of the material. That's what we're doing. Okay? If you had a chart, you have, do you know what yield and plastic length limits mean? Plastic limit is where it bends, yield is where it breaks. So we're taking those points higher up the scale so you won't have quite as much warning when it fails, but and then what we're doing, it doesn't really matter. We aren't building crane hooks.
When you have an I-beam, the reason that the flanges
Yep.
are there, the web of the beam doesn't do much to resist the bending.
Right.
But it's the flanges that do most of the work, because what you're trying to do is stretch that flange, and the further away it is, the more it has to stretch for a given deflection.
Let me see if I can remember this right. Okay. Moment of gyration?
Moment of inertia.
A moment of inertia, and then we had, what was the other thing here? We're trying to get technical. What we're doing is controlling the way the piece of metal moves as the web tries to keep it from doing this. Correct?
It's pretty much going to always back, right?
Yeah.
It's never going to go the other way, right?
No. It can go the other way. All right? So you have to pay attention. If you aren't getting the push of the fret, and you don't want a lot of push back, like you don't want it to really go crazy. You just want to see that you are controlling. Once you know that there's a certain amount of backbow, we know that the fret tang is compressing the neck.
But how could it go the other way? Like, I couldn't understand like how it would go.
Oh, well, it could go the other way because your slots are wider than the 23 that you think. Ebony is harder than rosewood. The barbs will... Right. Rosewood takes a little bit more to compression fret than ebony does because the stiffness of ebony's harder than rosewood. Ebony doesn't have a lot of pores that are, wide open. Rosewood is loaded with them. So they will allow the barbs to seat easier. And then the barb is what's really holding these open. Not so much the tang, because our tang is 23 thousandths. We're just relying on the wedge shape of the barb for a certain amount of reverse compression. Now, let's see here. Am I boring anybody? No? All right. Who here has pets? Okay, I have a cat. And my cat showed up in 2005, just the same time as our Chinese restaurant in town. So my cat's name is General So. And we've had him for 15 years, and the poor guy now has diabetes, and unfortunately, sadly, I'm afraid I have to go home and take him to the vet for the last time. So it's amazing how we love our animals. Who here has not been in bed with their pet with a leg cramp and did not want to move their leg to disturb the animal? Okay? I can remember one time my cat was missing 3 o'clock in the morning. I got to go to work at 7. I have a 14-acre field in front of my house, and I'm out there in the corn row with a spotlight looking for Bubba. Yeah. Ow. Ow. He didn't know if you wanted to kill him or hug him, so I hugged him and took him up and gave him a treat. Yeah. Glenn can confer my baby is well spoiled. Now, if you don't have one of these and you're very careful, you can file them off. That little pillar file works fairly well, but I really like this little jig. This jig is just, I can do a fret job fairly quickly. When you order one of these, will you make sure that you tell them that I influenced you, Mr. DeBurrow? Now, was that about a month and a half I called you about that bar fret job?
Yeah, maybe a little less than that. Well, yeah, I think there was a few communications, yeah.
Okay.
I think the last one, it was just a few weeks ago, right? You finished it up?
So, I had a 1901 0021 in my shop that had bar frets. Now, that guitar happened to be gut stringed, and we modified it. Didn't really modify it. We changed it over to silk and steel. And if you decide to do this for a living, I generally get $10 a fret for this. 15 if they're bound. Bar frets, $50 a fret. I spent 3 days, and I have an aluminum radius block that really it's tricky. So I would recommend, if you get a bar fret job, call Pat DeBurrow. I like you, Pat. Okay. So as you can now see, the main flex part of the neck has frets in it. You want to come up again and see how much stiffer this got? Yeah, now I can see. See, there's no, when I push down here, when you want to measure relief, the ABCs of setting a neck or setting a fretboard up. A, before you do anything, adjust relief. B, adjust the saddle. C, adjust the nut. Generally, I kind of cheat and capo on the first fret and get my readings. And then I will adjust my nut slot accordingly, which I will get into in a few minutes. So now you take a look at it.
Wow.
Okay?
That's really not deflecting it.
Yeah.
Well, just a tiny
Just a little bit.
Like, really, it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, see, what happens before, you have no support. In all of these slots, that's letting this happen. Okay? And it just lets it move.
That's
By,
a great visual.
is
That's
it?
fantastic.
You like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so now when you start putting the fret wire in there, that's going to start pushing it back, and it won't let it do this anymore. So once you stop it from doing this, collapsing on itself, now you're controlling the neck stiffness. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay, so after you go through the whole neck, I recommend that you get something that's true and flat. Okay? 60-year-old butt's pretty flat, but this is flatter. And I have a 320 grit on here. At this point, once I have everything set, I will trim the fret wires. You notice I'm not sliding my fingers up and down, Pat? See? I do learn! Yeah, that was pretty good. I thought we were going to have to call 911. Okay, is there any questions? Does anything here not make sense? Shoot.
Slotting, if you talk about slotting just for a second.
Yes.
Whether it's pocketed or through slots,
Right.
how are you creating those? And given the radius of the fingerboard, are they a consistent depth even with radius, or are you slotting and then radiusing?
I assume you're making your own fretboards.
I've made one guitar.
Okay.
I'm trying to do it correctly, but
I
I
do.
slotted to a consistent depth, but then when I'm radiusing, the slots are becoming less deep on the ends of the fingerboard.
What method of cutting the slots are you using, if I may ask?
With a fresh saw and miter box.
Okay, so you have a way to control your positioning, because as you probably noticed, when you're doing them by hand, you have a tendency to get a little bit of manipulation of your tool. Are you measuring the fret slots with a feeler gauge?
Yes.
What are you getting?
Don't know offhand, it's been a couple years.
Okay, 23 to 25 probably. Okay, I generally set my slots. I start a fretboard at about 1/4 of an inch thick. And I go to old Martin specs. I do not have a fretboard that's 1/4 of an inch thick. I generally make them a little bit thinner. So I'm figuring that I'm going to look at my slot. I want to make sure that the slot is longer than the tang by about 30 thousandths. So if you want to radius your fretboard, but don't taper it. Now, when you do the slot, the bottom of the slot is going to be parallel to the bottom of the fretboard, not radiused to, but with a handsaw you could do that. I do them straight like that. You know you're going to have more slot in the middle than you will at the end. So try to set it up so you're about maybe 30 thousandths to the bottom of the slot, and then adjust the thickness by taking it off the bottom of the fretboard. I'm a lucky man. I have a nice thickness sander, and once I get the top set, then I take it off the bottom. You're good on Martin specs. If I remember right, we're about 187 thousandths on the edge of the fretboard.
I think that's right. It's been a while since I've had to measure that, but.
Yeah, it's somewhere around 187 thousandths. Weight is a tone killer, even if it's on the neck. So if you look at old Martin guitars, you're going to see that the fretboards on them are considerably thin compared to what you buy. So a lot of people will get a guitar kit and assume that the fretboard is properly thicknessed. No, it's not. Okay.
But no harm, I think you answered the question, so no harm in keeping the depth of the slot a little bit deeper in the middle.
Absolutely not.
As long as
Absolutely not. Now that's the other advantage of using tight bond in the groove. You want to see the glue come out. Then that helps to be a filler later when you're doing finishing. Here I just used water. Then if this was a through slot, I would drop fill, usually with, I have a little bottle of lacquer. Actually, fingernail polish works pretty good sometimes too. And I have that sitting on a windowsill. Then I just come back, get a toothpick, get a drop of lacquer that's, almost like gum. Set that at the slots and let that sit for a couple days and then sand it smooth. On these, you don't need to worry about that. Same way with the bound fingerboards. And as he said before, watch how close you are, because through the expansion and contraction, you don't want to pop the binding off if somebody dries one out.
And then how are you creating, if I can ask, the pocket slots?
Okay, when I do it, I have a radial arm saw. I think I have the StewMac saw blade. I have a jig set up, so I actually have, depending upon what my scale length is, I can bump, 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 and then just go right through. And that's how I do it. I do not take the blade. For those of you anybody here use a power saw to cut a slot? Okay. Don't take the blade out of the fingerboard. All right? When you bring it to the edge, in a radial arm saw, I got to take it back in. On a table saw, yes, you can go through. Are you doing it on a table saw?
I built a jig with a little tile saw with a 4-inch blade in it.
Okay. A 4-inch blade, you don't have near as much wobble. I think the StewMac blade is, 6 inches in diameter?
Use that one.
Even with a 4-inch blade, I'm looking to get a stiffener, but.
Yeah, because at 23 thousandths, those things really start deflecting when they hit wood. So, you have to be cognizant of the deflection of the tool as you're cutting it, and then get your fret slots accordingly, or your fret tang accordingly.
But you're making a pocket fret only because your fingerboard's bound. Yeah.
Yeah, usually if I make my own fretboards, I do cut them through, but I need that many of them.
CNC machines, you actually cut the slot in an unbound board.
Yeah,
That's pretty slick.
yeah. I have a milling machine. I've used it, but to be honest with you, because of productivity, it's easier to go, Chris, send me 10. Yep, yep. Don't send me the 22 frets like you did last time. Got it? Okay. Because they cost me, when you buy them in bulk, they're like, what, $41? You know, I can't make a fretboard for $41. So, but if you want to make your own, that's something you want to be aware of. All right? And a feeler gauge, always use a feeler gauge so you know about where you're at. And I would recommend that you want to get a fret tang that is about 4 to 5 thousandths narrower than your fret slot.
Say that again, please.
You're going to make me say that again. You want your fret tang to be about 4 to 5 thousandths thinner than your fret slot, unless you are compression fretting. Okay? Agree?
Yeah, well, you know, with rosewood, you have Brazilian and you have Indian, and those can have different
Yes, they do.
stiffness, so you need to be aware of that.
Yeah, so if you're using a regular truss rod, there's a much larger envelope for error using an adjustable truss rod than a neck reinforcement. So now that we've discussed with an adjustable rod, let me explain to you compression fretting, and now I expect to hear from you. Okay, compression fretting, yes sir?
In the last part, in the slotting of the pre-slotting before the fret, how much gap do you allow for the glue at the bottom of the tang?
I generally like to have about maybe 25, 30 thousandths on the edge of the fretboard. So you're going to have a lot more on inside. Now the glue is not going to glue the fret in. The glue is serving two purposes. Number one, it's helping to be a lubricant to help the barbs slip down on the end grain. And as Mr. DeBurrow pointed out, you have to be cognizant of the wood material that you're using. Have you done anything with that rich light yet?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I find, people give it a bad knock. I actually like it.
It takes a fret really well, but you've got to be really aware of the fret tang thickness because that can really backbow because it's so stiff of material.
Now the other advantage to chamfering the corner of the fret slot, here we are. So if you knock this corner off here, all right, and you got your fret wire on top of here, and you have your tang in here. At some point, you're going to have to pull a fret. We all have our own little tools. I got an old $9 Harbor Freight soldering iron, to which I took a little triangular file and put a groove in. And I'll ride the fret, because you got to be careful. If it's too deep of a groove, you touch the fingerboard. That you do not want to do. And you're just going to heat that to dissolve. I know Martin used glue, then they went to water. Now I don't know if they use anything. Are they back to glue? Okay. As I started saying, I think I kind of sidestepped this. The glue does two things. Allowing the barb to slip. Then when it cures, it's acting as a filler. Now, it doesn't necessarily glue the fret wire in, but you have all of this material in here. The heat from your soldering iron will also help soften the wood. Now, by having the chamfer, when you're dealing with old guitars, when you start pulling that fret, there's a good bit that you're going to pop a chip out. The chamfer helps to eliminate that problem. You might still have some, but you have a chance for the barb to come out before it comes to the surface and lift. So good advice is when you're pulling frets, put some tape right along the side of the fret wire. As you lift it, that's going to hold your chip in place. Here's where thin super glue can come in handy. Okay, now what else was I talking about before I interrupted myself?
I don't know, you were on a good roll there.
I was, I'll tell you what. Okay, Now we're going to start talking about compressive fretting. That is where the tang will get closer to the size of your fret slot. Now, it isn't always necessarily the barb that's pushing, or the tang that's pushing, but more of the barb is going in there. But with some of the older guitars that were done quite a few times, you've got to really be cognizant of the fall off that you create. And as I said before, here I'm happy to get, 6,000ths. When I'm doing a compression fret job, whether it be bar fret or the T slots, now that's the only way you're going to control that back bow, because you're not going to be able to adjust the neck with a wrench. So here I want to work it, and I want to get about 7 to 9, and I'm constantly putting the weight on my guitar so that I can control what tang I think I may need. And this is not a science. This is just years of experience. And as Pat pulled out, if you're dealing with a rosewood guitar versus an ebony guitar, you may have to go a little bit heavier. And it's just, that's where having the weight and the straight edge helps you to visualize what the neck would be doing under a string load. Okay?
What about the Stumac neck jig, which is supposed to simulate that? What do you think about that?
I don't have one. Well, I can't say I don't have one. I do have one. It is amazing if you have a strung up guitar here and then you turn it that way, it will move to a certain degree. So when you're doing your final setup, make sure that you pick the guitar up into the playing position and do it. Do you need a neck jig? Not really. But if you have a neck jig, it's just another piece of information that you can use to do a better fret job. I've probably done 1,000 fret jobs, and being an old tool maker, I understand what's moving, so I know where I want to be. Electric guitars are different than these. Okay? When you take a look at an electric guitar, that's an altogether different animal, and there, a neck jig is very useful. Okay? These are a little bit more robust than Fender Tele. Okay? Would you agree?
Yeah, I use a neck jig.
Okay, there you go.
On fretboard planing and for finishing off or facing off the frets once they're done. But I use the older Stumac one, which was the big table that rotated.
Oh, that's cool.
It's going way back.
Yeah, that's going way, way back.
And it's got the 8 or so fingers underneath the neck. It's not that new aluminum thing.
Okay.
I have that old neck jig too.
Yeah, and it works great because then I also put pressure. I have 2 thumb wheels that come down on the shoulders to simulate what you're doing with your cups of weights.
And you will see as much as 10,000ths movement, just moving the neck from one end. You think these things don't move, but oh yes, they do.
Yeah, you always have to check your action and your truss rod adjustment in playing position. Because if you put it on the bench like that, the weight of the guitar is actually going to give you a false reading.
Yep. Thank you for that, and he's absolutely correct. Because usually when I'm all doing my stuff on the bench, I do that. And how I when I check my neck relief when I'm done, I generally put my finger here at the 13th fret and the 1st, and I can take a look at the line of the string between 1 and 12, and then I just come up here to 6 and 7, and I want to take a look at how much gap is underneath the top of the fret and underneath the string. Generally, I want to see 4 to 6 to me is max. I think Martin's spec is 9, and personally, I think 9 is too much. I'm looking, if you see 4, Rick Davis, he calls it the tink test. If you can go there and you hear tink, 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 you should be good. Now, the tools that I use at home that are not here is I have an aluminum block that is machined to 16-inch radius. It's this long. And when I go to true my frets up, I don't have the nut in, and I can gently work this back and forth. I'll take a Sharpie pen, mark all of the frets, and then just gently, and you want to be very cognizant that you stay in the same line. You don't want to do this. Just go nice and easy. And once you get all of the fret, the marker off the fret, I remark it, and then that's when I start going into my crowning process. Now,
if you're doing that, that aluminum beam is flat.
Yes.
Okay, that means that at that point, you're shaving the frets off so the whole deal is flat.
Correct. And I also want to,
So there's no back bow or anything at that point.
no. And what I want to tell you also is when this is on my bench, all right, I have a shooter's rest here and a shooter's rest here. And it's all kind of set up so this doesn't move, because as I'm putting weight on to sand it, I don't want that neck flexing on me. So that would be a good job for the neck jig. Okay. So I may have to, thank you, I may have to get my neck jig back out and think about reusing it. But everywhere that you can control, and let's talk about variables. From an engineering standpoint, you always have a variable. And you want to be able to control those variables. So identify your variables. Number one, the neck bow, because we don't know what the neck bow is particularly. So when you want to control that. Number two, the hardness of the wood that you're using. Even ebony can change from one board to another. Number three is going to be your tang. And let's not forget humidity. Wood expands usually across the grain, not so much along the grain. So understand your variables. Use them to your advantage. All right? Now, as I'm going to go through the leveling process, this is supported. In fact, I used to have a... anybody here have table saws? Okay. This thumb went through the blade twice. I'm very lucky I still have it. I made a little jig on a table saw that I can actually use. You want to cut something that you can actually put support here. If you don't have a neck jig, you can take a block like a 2x4, cut a nice groove in it. You can actually put a V in it so that you can set it on here. That way when you're applying weight, it's supported under here so the neck does not spring. All right? Now, the files that I prefer to use, I told you before, I am going to use pillar files. So after I have this all leveled, I will take the, I have a crowning file. Anybody here don't have any crowning files or don't know what a crowning file is? Okay. I prefer the diamond ones.
Triangle, still old school.
Oh, you old school? Okay. I wish you would, then you should have bought one, because that's art.
Yeah.
The guys with the old school that can do that, my hat goes off to you. I like these. This is my tool. But yeah, I know a couple guys that use them, and yeah, that's an art.
Yeah, just the way I learned years ago, but you've got to tape off the board, so that's more work.
And I did use a pillar file to clean up the bar frets, because... Okay, once I get...
I'm still not clear, going back to the other question, you just spent some time getting the exact backbone that you want. When you put the frets in, and then you go level them with a perfectly flat bar.
Correct.
Is that what they'll make? Just take out the backbone you've carefully put in?
Yeah, it will. But see what that's doing to me, now the neck's back there, I know where I'm at. That means that that neck is now under compression as the strings are pulling, so I'm controlling the back bow under a load. All right? Now, you may want to adjust the truss rod so that your neck is straight as you can get it when you dress your frets. Okay, I kind of missed that point. Okay, so yeah, I will take that neck, I will adjust the truss rod, get it straight, and dress my frets. All right?
And then you're relying on string tension to give you a little bit of relief when you get
Correct.
all done.
Exactly.
John, are you using the notched?
No.
No, yeah. Because I was
No.
wondering if you put the straight edge on the uncrowned frets, they may have some variation. So when you're trying to get your neck straight.
Once I go over that with my radius block, I'm true. Okay? I have nothing against the notch. If you want to use it, go right ahead. I've been blessed with some machinist skills for 25 years, so there's other ways of doing it. If it works for you,
I've never used one.
yeah. I don't use one. I use this to make sure my fretboard is straight before I put the frets on. At that point, I'm relying on making the neck straight again when I dress my frets. Dressing the frets is a process. I will actually start with this. And this does not, here, pass that around. It only weighs a couple of pounds, not even a pound and a half maybe. And I do not add weight. I'm just going to gently rub this up and down until I see all of the ink off of my fret. Once it's off the fret, and then I'm going to go into the crowning process. So think school bus, don't think round, think school bus. But when you do them with your triangular file, is that kind of what you think?
Yeah, well, I try, in doing fretting work, I try to not touch the frets after they're in. I try to get them seated so well that I'm really not even crowning.
Because I don't take much off. I mean, when you take, the reason that I do this is I just want everything as dead flat as I can get it. And we all have our techniques. There is no one perfect way. The more somebody says my way's the only way, shake his hand, thank him, and walk away. I mean, you can learn from anybody, even the village idiot, if it's not to do it that way. But if you find a technique that works for you and is repeatable and you can reproduce the end result, that's what you want to do. Now, when I go through the polishing after the leveling, I'll use the crowning file.
Before you get away from the leveling, so you have the supported on the back,
Yes.
you have your radius block, and you mark it with a magic marker.
Right.
Is it an abrasive that you're using?
Yeah, it's 320 grit. Now, the radius, once I'm done, I don't use the radius block on the frets unless I'm bar fretting. Let me make that clear. I use this, and I'm just dressing, and you can look down your fretboard, and you can see a bad fret. And you can also use a little rocker. A fret can be low in front of a high fret, but it can't be high in front of a low fret. I know it sounds weird, because we probably do some cowboy refretting. You have a guitar where the top 7 frets are worn to crap and the ones on up through were never touched. So I'll just pull those and do a cowboy refret, and usually the ones up there are going to be a couple thousand slow, but it won't hurt anything. Now when I go back to recrowning, I'm going to use my radiused fret file, crowning file. I'll put ink on there again, and I kind of like work this way and then this way till I just get a thin line of ink, and then I go back through. That's when I start polishing. I use a cork and a white Draftsman eraser. I'll start with 800 grit and work up to 3000 grit, and then I take it to my buffing wheel. Okay, bar frets.
So back to leveling.
Yes.
That bar is flat, it's flat, straight.
That's flat.
And you're basically rolling that over the radius on the fret.
Actually, what I'm kind of following the line of each string, and I'm allowing the flat edge to take the radius that I'm following. To a certain degree, I'm almost putting a compound radius in the frets ever so slightly, but it's really, really ever so slight. So,
As opposed to having a 16-inch radius
yes.
block.
Right. I mean, you could probably use a 16-inch radius block if you want to. I just prefer, that's the technique that I use, but using the radius block, you probably will do just fine. Okay? Anybody else got any questions on that before I go? Oh, yes, sir.
If you're using a radius block and you're tapered, you're going away, won't that change as you go down the fretboard?
Ever so slightly. If you do the geometry, we're talking tenths of thousandths of an inch.
So either one.
Yeah, you find a technique that's going to work for you so that you have very repeatable results. This is a technique that I've learned, and it worked for me for 20 years. And this is something that this is when I started about 5 years ago.
So the only reason I'm asking that is because it's just new to me that I was doing a mandolin and he talks about that.
Yeah.
So that's because the neck's way shorter, right?
Yeah, that's very, very tiny. The longer the neck, the more open the tolerance for error. The smaller the neck.
So in a guitar link, you really can't go wrong with
No. The object is to get consistency. And now if we get into bar frets are altogether different than T frets because a T fret is 80 thousandths wide. Bar frets actually vary in their width because you have to manipulate the slot with the particular bar fret in order to get the proper back bow. And they do not have barbs. So that entire thing is actually pinch held into your fretboard. I do cheat and put a little bit of glue in there, but then he taught me a trick where you take a little chisel and you just pop a couple of little tinks at the bottom of the fret, and that'll actually give you a little bit of expansion so that when you put it down there, it's mushroomed. So it does give you a little bit of a mechanical hold, and you aren't just relying on the walls of the fret slot to hold the fret. And thank you for that.
Yeah, they act like barbs.
Yeah, they do.
Mini barbs.
Yeah, only it's just so slight. Yes, sir.
John, you talked early on about the fretboard extension
Yes.
tapering down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do that in the leveling process? Do you
Yes.
do that by having a constant thickness fretboard, like a neck angle, so it naturally does that?
Okay, depending if you're doing a refret or a new guitar, I generally want my fret plane, and I have a video on there on initial setup and next set addendum, where I actually create this plane to be dead flat. And then what I will do is when I do the fret leveling, I'm going to treat this as fretboard A, fretboard B, and here I'm just going to take a little bit extra off of the frets, because number one, of all the fret jobs I've done, how often, have you ever seen a worn out 14th fret?
No.
Yeah. So, you know, very, very little playing's done up here, so you can just take them off mechanically. And that way when people look down your neck, most people are going to look at the corner of the fretboard as it goes down there, and that fretboard looks nice and straight, and you've created the drop-off in the actual crowning of the frets. I don't know if you do that or not, or you agree or disagree.
No, I agree with you. Yeah.
So with a slight neck angle then, because like the guitar I built, I can't hit a 1.5 degree angle.
Mm-hmm.
My fretboard was constant width, which maybe it shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
But then when, of course, I'm attaching the fretboard to the body and the neck, it naturally is kind of tapering down because the neck angle.
Yeah, well, on a fret, when you do, if you fret off of the guitar, the natural expansion of the barbs will tend to take the fingerboard extension and cup it down. The reason that I now no longer do it that way is I just find that I get a much more controllable fret plane when it's on the, I mean, after all, it's on the guitar now. When it's not on the guitar, you're basically guessing here. Up here, you can pretty much nail it, but down here you can't.
But you basically aim for a flat fretboard. And then
I aim for a flat fretboard and then just kind of overdress the lower frets. That's all. Because that's going to go up and down a little bit. A little drop-off's good. Ski nose, no. And with bar frets, it's basically the same thing, but the problem with bar frets, here is where I will use the radius block. And bar fretting is, I will tell you this, it is an art. It is an art, and thank you again, Pat. You saved me at least 2 cases of beer. I had this bright idea. I have all of these nice little vices from my machinist days in a mill. I can put the radius in and I'll flatten it. Great idea, but it didn't work for shit. So I pulled those frets out and I just pounded in them like I did now with using his little tippy tap on the corner. And I'd say I lifted maybe a 10,000 spur. That's all. And that worked pretty good. But I still used tight bond when I put them in just to help. And they held very well. I left the glue and I left everything sit for maybe a day because, I mean, bar frets are challenging. Because when you look down that fretboard with those bars, they're sticking up, what, 200 thousandths?
Huge.
Huge.
Who uses bar frets? What manufacturers use those?
Oh, there's a lot of boutique builders, but Martin used them up until 34. Thank you. They were used up into 34. So when you're dealing with old Martins, you have to deal with them. I've heard arguments, oh, they make your guitar sound better. I have a theory about that. If you can hear the difference, you can wag your tail and lick your kahunas too. So, do you think it really makes that big of a difference?
No, as long as any fret is well seated, I think that's the key.
And to me, I call them finger trippers. I have 4 bar fret guitars. Do I like them? Yes. Are they my favorite? Absolutely not.
Like speed bumps.
Yes. I mean, it is a weird feel, but those guys that love them, they love them. So, you know, as a car salesman, there's an ass for every seat. There you go. All right. Is there anything that nut slot. Now, the last thing, after you have your fret plane done, I want you to think about this. When you're setting up to do your nut, okay, here's your nut. All right? Here's your fretboard. Right? You want to put a nut slot in. Now, in theory, the line off of your fret should be the bottom of your nut slot. Yes and no?
No.
I've tried to keep about 4 to 7 thousandths above the fret. Who here makes a ramp in their nut? No. Think roller. Here's your nut slot. Here, you don't want to have this. Metal does not bend at a given point. It will always arc. So who here has already heard your zittar on your guitar? You have an air gap and you're getting a reverse buzz on your string. So what you want to do is kind of create a little bit of an arc. Just ever so slight of an arc. And you're going to have a much smoother tuning. You're going to have a much easier intonating and tuned up guitar.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay? Do you have to have the nut slot the same size as the string? No, you do not. But you do want to pay attention to how is the string coming into your nut. You might have, here's your headstock. There's your tuners. Here's your nut. So you got this coming here, this coming here, this coming here. So they are not coming in dead straight. So you may want to put a little bit of a bugle opening on the back of the nut so that you are not creating that bending point in the string. You want it to be able to arc. Because how many times you got a nice nut where you can go wing wing and you can hear it sliding nice and neat, but you go to tune and all of a sudden you're tightening and all of a sudden pop. The windings on the bass, on the wrapped strings will catch that corner and hold that until they break loose. So just break that corner a little bit in the back. And I'm not talking like a tuba. I'm just talking open that little bit of a sharp corner so that you can allow the string to pass by. All right.
What do you like for a final height on the nut, on the strings, at the first fret?
That's a good question because I've had them buried. I've had them half open. I've had them all over. I kind of like to see about maybe 2/3 of the string at least into the nut. And if your player is one of those bluegrass guys that's yanking on that thing and he's using the silver dollar for a pick, I generally put the trebles all the way into the nut.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. What I meant was if you're in setting up the nut, final setup, the height of the string off of, let's say, the first fret in your final setup.
Okay. Here's where I take a number 9 Fender E string, I loop it, pluck the string, and I slide that underneath the string while it's playing. And I'll keep doing that until I catch that 9,000th string that you just hear that you tink, tink. So I'm looking for somewhere, I'll accept 6, 9's my target.
Across all of the strings or bass side as well?
Oh, well, I generally, well, yeah. I'll come down because if I know I'm 9,000ths over the fret before it's buzzing, I know I got at least that much before it will. And 9,000ths clearance in the fret, off of the fret plane, does make for a pretty soft playing. And as Steve Kovacic used to say, fret the second fret, look at the gap on the first fret. You don't want it really dead flat. You want to see a little bit on there. One other thing that I wanted to mention real quick. Okay, see this little drawing I have here? If you really want to learn to understand intonation on a guitar, you can sit here and you can read books, you can talk to people. The best way to find out exactly that works for you, you take a bridge, stick it to a piece of wood, make this like a piece of plywood or a 2x4. Make it that you can clamp your bridge down. Put a fingerboard on there. Now you can start sliding your saddle up and down, play with the height of the string on your action, now you're going to learn that, oh, well, if my action is high and I keep the bridge point here, I'm sharp. So that has to go back. If it's lower, I'm flat. Remember, when you build a new guitar, the guitar is not a guitar yet. It's just a box with strings. It's going to take a little while. The guitar is going to go under stress. Your bridge is going to move ever so slightly, and it will rotate. That means the saddle, which you now had here to length X, is now going to be X minus. In plain words, it's going to go sharp on you. So if you make that little bit of a jig, you can start playing with the relationship of the position of the saddle to your scale length so that you can dial in the best intonation for the guitar that you're building. After all, a finger picker that's running a 2-3 action doesn't need the exact scale length that a bluegrass player is going to play if he's using a 3-4 action. Because remember, the higher the string, the more you're pulling sharp. So if I set up this guitar, I want to see using a square saddle without a ramp or an angled saddle that at the front of the saddle I am maybe just dead nuts on or 2 cents flat. Because once that moves forward, she's going to dial in. And remember, when you're playing a guitar and you're tuning a guitar, you're fretting it all together different. You're always going to play it and pull it just a touch sharp. So the human ear also picks up sharp a lot quicker than it will flat. So if you take a look at my video on YouTube, Gluing a Bridge, I will talk about that. And I think I also have a chat about intonation that Evan and I had done a couple symposiums ago. So will you agree with that, that there is no one perfect length?
Yeah. Usually if I'm making a new bridge, I won't do the saddle slot. I won't put the saddle slot in. I'll string the whole guitar up. And then I use StuMac's intonator. Have you seen that? It's fabulous because it allows me to set each individual saddle point, and then I'll just leave the guitar strung up for a while and go back and recheck it and then make my determination where I want to cut the saddle.
There you go. That's a very good method too. So there's a lot of ways to do things. My best advice whenever you're looking at tooling, take a look at what the alternative motive is. What do they want to sell you? I'm sure you and I can go through our shop and we can find little jigs that we made for 98 cents instead of $43.72. And we didn't have to pay shipping. And John Wayne once said it best, sometimes you just have to do some thinking, drinking. So sit down and get a goofy idea. No discovery was ever made by status quo thinking. So think outside the box once in a while. Yes, sir.
John, are you going to cover dressing the fret ends?
Okay, dressing the fret ends is a simple matter. There I use this pillar file. There are many jigs out there that have different angles that you can flush them off. I just do them by hand. First thing I'm going to do is going to true them up to the edge so that they're clean to the edge of the fretboard. Then I put my angle. Be careful that you do not over-angle your fret ends, because if you're playing a treble note and your angle is here, you're going to pull the string off. So I generally go somewhere around 30 degrees. 45 is max. I wouldn't want to go over 45 max. Then to learn to dress the fret ends, I have learned that you can use two things. I got very, very good with this little guy. And all you got to do is break the corner, run your finger up and down. If you see white marks, you got sharp edges. And I actually will take the fret end and I will hit the fretboard ever so slightly. That puts that sharp edge of the fret on the board. Does that make sense to you?
What does that motion look like on the neck when you're doing
Oh, if I'm going to be fretting, I'm going to do this. I'm going to come almost straight on, and I just kind of do, I just roll like that. All right? Same way here, roll. There are soft grinding stones that you can buy through MSC that also work very well for that. I've often taken a eraser with 800 grit, and I take my fret protector, and I'll just take it and go right over it. The eraser will crush, and it doesn't take a lot. All you got to do is break that Euclidean line. How's that?
I love it.
Oh, you like that? Yeah. Remember geometry? You went to Catholic school. How many times did they whap you in the back of the head till you learned that point?
Well, they whacked me in the back of the head for a lot different things than that.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Todd, are you doing each one of the 30-degree angles individually?
Oh, no. I'm going to go. And I also put,
What tool are you doing that?
actually, when I do it, I start with this. It's a second cut mill file. Then I come into this pillar file. Then I come into this pillar file. And then I dress the end. You know you've done it good when you can run. I almost did it. when you run your finger up and down and you don't feel sharp edges. And then I also kind of polish them up on my buffing wheel. Okay? Did everybody? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You tap your frets in. Do you ever recommend or not recommend pressing with it?
Use what works for you. I have a fret press. I just did this for so long, I'm good at it. And is it right or is it wrong? It's right or wrong for you.
But the pressing works.
Sure it does. The only thing you have to be careful of with pressing is you got to make sure that the fretboard does match the radius of the press. That's it. Other than that, yeah, it works fine. Yes, sir.
You probably addressed this, and I probably missed it, but when you talked about setting frets, and I think you were particular to compression frets, you want to end up with somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 9 thousandths of back bow
Yes.
after all the frets are installed. And then you're working the frets as you're dressing them with a flat instrument. How does that relate to the fact that you've had 7 to 9, 7 to 10 thousandths or something of back bow? Was that back bow, this is a complex question, was that when the guitar is resting under its own weight, or was that when it's in the playing position?
The back bow is resting on its own weight, and I should make this very clear. When I go to level the frets, I will weight the guitar to get the neck as straight as I possibly can, because the string tension is going to pull the neck forward, and in a compression fret situation, that's what you're relying on. So there is a certain amount of spring in the part of the fretboard in the neck that is not exceeded by the weight of the on the neck when you're trying to establish it straight. So this.
So when you set up to with the flat thing, you want to have the fretboard flat. You apply weight until it goes flat.
Correct.
Then you start to dress.
There you go. That's what I like to do. In the neck jig, he has a little thing that he can actually pull that down, and he can adjust that reasonably straight. I think mine had 3 dial indicators on it for position of the fretboard.
Mine doesn't. I just have an aluminum bar with 5 dial indicators that I just set on top, run it across the neck to see where it.
Yeah, the one I have isn't from Stu Mac. It's one that I kind of rigged up. And
My own as well. Yeah.
so, yeah, the I guess the crux of the argument is you need to know to have a way that you can repeatably set up the neck under stress and take measurements, because as I said before, no 2 necks bend exactly the same, and the neck flex is going to be mostly from the 7th fret to the 1st fret. That's where the crux of the neck of deflection is going to be. Plus, the further up you go to the neck, the more forgiveness there will be, because the angle of the string to the saddle increases. Okay? Yes, sir.
That means if you're relying, then get it flat, and you rely on the string tension to give you a little bit of relief.
Correct.
That amount of relief is going to vary based on stiffness of neck and fingerboard material.
And string gauge. Yes. So when we look at old Martins that are set up for medium strings, and then you go and put a set of extra lights on it to save the top and find out that the damn thing's buzzing like crazy, that's not because the guitar isn't working. It's because the guitar was fretted in a condition for a medium fret job. So there you go. Thank you. Is there any question? Well, you, sir.
You talked a lot about fretting a new guitar. What about doing a fret job on a guitar that already has frets?
Okay, well,
pulling them, could you discuss the process?
Pulling the frets, we talked a little bit earlier, where I just use a soldering iron with a groove in it. I have a little, it was a Craftsman precision tool set they used to have. And they're really small little dikes, and I just ground them to this so that as I heat up, you can work that underneath there. Don't pull them. Let that work. And then as the heat gets to the wood, it will soften it, and you work that out, and it's like pulling a kid's tooth. And they'll pull them all out, then it's the same process. Level the fretboard. Yes. And then it's basically the same process. The only difference is you have to go through the whole releveling the fretboard, taking fingerboard divots out, of which frets.com has a wonderful little tutorial there on fingernail divots, on how to fill them up with super glue and a razor blade. And yeah, you can see it, but it does work. Have you used shellac sticks?
Years ago.
Yeah.
But the burn-in sticks, yeah,
Yeah.
years ago, yeah.
I still use them on, I had an old rosewood guitar, and the guy decided he wanted to learn inlay work. And he basically removed almost, he just put a big pocket in the 7th fret. And I use shellac sticks, which are burn-in sticks. So I burnt in first with the darker color, took a nail, put a point so I could match my grain lines down, found another one, laid that on there, filed that down, and it actually made a pretty darn good repair. So if you want to learn how to do that stuff, that's where you get a piece of wood. As I told you, the drinking thinking, sit down and play, because you'll be surprised what you can find by accident. I mean, some of you got to have a good boo-boo story that came out and learned you something.
In what way? What are you talking about? Right?
Well, okay, you had to have done something one time that you did wrong, and you had to save your ass, and you discovered that you had a good idea.
Just getting back to compression fretting, and with the older non-adjustable necks, I think it's really important that when we're going for a target relief under tension of maybe 5 thousandths in playing position, and when you're using different fret tangs to achieve that stiffness, what I've found is that I will go and install frets 2 to frets 11. I'll just pound them in, then I'll string the guitar up. I won't dress them, I won't do anything to them, I'll then just pound them in, then string the guitar up, and then check to see if I've achieved my relief that I want. Because if not, because quite often, I won't be there. So I learned that because one time I was doing it, I went through the entire process, fretted, leveled, dressed, strung it up, and realized I'm not even close. Yeah. So by pounding in those frets, and if they're wrong, take them out, put a different set in.
And there is a case, well, I will admit, I don't often like the notched fretboard thing, but I think that would probably be a good tool to have in the arsenal after having done one. Because what I did is I put them all in, grabbed my block, ground them true, measured my relief, and then just started grinding them down. And that's a 4-beer job.
Sure.
So when you string a guitar like that, what do you do, like the strings? Like, are you taking them out of the peg end and then sort of coiling them, or like how is it that you do that process where you're stringing the guitar? Like I just don't really have.
Okay, well, you just imagine you've got say 10 frets that have been pounded into the fingerboard 2 to 11, and they're sticking out on the ends, but that doesn't stop you from being able to string up the guitar. The nut's still there, the saddle's still there. Just string it up to pitch, and then just put it in playing position and measure the relief. Do you follow me?
Right, and so at that point where you're going back and you're working the fret, you're undoing the strings. Are you undoing them from the machine end of it, or are you undoing them from the pen end of it? Like, I guess I just don't string a guitar that much that... Take them out of the pins.
Sure, yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you were asking. Yeah, so what I'll do is I put a capo on the first fret, pull out all the bridge pins, and then just pull the strings off to the side, so then I can put them back on very quickly.
So the capo on
Yeah, put a capo on the first fret. That kind of keeps the windings intact.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't do it that much, and so the idea of stringing a guitar, like 4 years ago, just stringing a guitar was daunting to me.
Oh, sure, yes, I'm just taking them off temporarily, and then pounding in a different set of frets. Yeah.
Is there any particular reason why you started the second fret instead of the first?
Well, I don't think the first fret, and possibly even the second fret, has that much effect on the bow that I'm trying to create.
So it's just a minimal amount of work.
Yeah, exactly, and I think once you get past the 11th fret, again, it has no real effect on the curvature. So I'm just trying to go for the frets that really affect the curvature or the relief, yeah.
Okay.
And those seem to be the ones that do it.
And if you're not getting the relief you want, the only alternative is to...
No, there's a thicker fret, or go back and replane the fingerboard.
Put a little relief in the finger.
Well, yeah, what I'll do is I'll put the neck into a jig, and I'll actually have the neck lifted up, possibly into like a 10,000 back or
And then
5,000.